Today we are building this floating shelf made from mesquite. We're going to hand inlay some bow ties, do some carving, and hand cut a half lap. So let's get started. So we'll keep this knot and then I'll cut a straight edge on here for this side to hit the wall. So based on what the client's measurements, all right, so it has this nice natural crack in it. I'm gonna put some bow ties in it, but it's got some weird cracking along there too that I don't think looks as nice as I think I can make it. So I'm just gonna do a little artistic surgery to widen the crack out a little bit and take care of some of the snags and things. All right, so I like that better. It's a little more pronounced. Now to make it look like it's been aged and that it's been in there a while, I'm gonna put some brown dye down in there. All right, I still got some sanding to do, but if I mask some of this off to help prevent getting too much dye on the face, it will definitely save me some sanding time, which is always a bonus. My least favorite thing about woodworking is sanding. If it spills under the tape, no big deal, I can sand it off. But if I get a huge puddle, then that's just a lot of work. All right, this could be a spectacular mess or help drive that stain down in there. Find out here. Got a little bleed through, but I think that's pretty successful. Clean that up a little bit. So as that dries, it should have a similar color to some of the knots and things that naturally occur in the wood. All right, so I cut my bow ties out and I'm going to decide which side I want to face up. And I'm just going to kind of lay them out where I think they're going to look cool. This is just to make sure it doesn't wiggle around on me while I try to line it all up. This marking knife is flat on one side, so I can put it flat against my workpiece. And I'm going to start and work from both sides, very gentle, because if it gets caught in the grain can pull the knife out of away from the bow tie. I did a full in-depth video of how to inlay bow ties completely by hand. So if you are interested in doing that, I will put a link in the description. All right, so the piece that I cut off the end of the original slab, I've squared up, and we're gonna cut a decorative curve on the front face. So I'm just gonna lay that guy out. I'm just gonna tack a nail on the outside of where the line's gonna be. So when I cut the curve, it'll cut that hole off. Alright, so just got a thin piece of maple to use as a bending guide, and I found my center point here. Alright, and then we'll just cut that out on the bandsaw. Alright, I'm getting a little ahead of myself laying out the curve. I want to cut the joinery first for the half lap. So I'm setting up at the table saw here to cut it to its final length, and then I'll set up to cut the half lap for it to join the main shelf, and then we'll cut the curve. All right, to cut my half lap in the upright support, I need to build a jig. So I've cut two pieces of plywood and I've jointed the edges of them so they're nice and square. And then I'm going to put my slab in the vise and build my jig around it. I'll put a tack in here so it doesn't come apart while I'm routing. All right, so now this slot is the exact thickness of our shelf. So I'm going to use this slot to route out the half lap to go over this shelf. All right, I put a little double stick tape down here to help hold it in place while I route. All right, so that should be centered now. All right, so I'm just going to use a shallow router bit with a bearing on it to follow my pattern and cut the dados. All right, so I bottomed out the router bit onto the workpiece, and then I'm just going to use these turret stops and my spacer to set my spacing. All right, just to do a quick test fit, make sure it's going to fit across there. It's a pretty nice fit, I think. All right, so now I'm going to cut the half lap part of the joint going down this direction. I cut this on the table saw, but the table saw is not, the blade doesn't go tall enough. Alright, that's fitting pretty good. So now I just need to cut the corresponding half lap onto this face. So I have my square set up the distance from the edge to where I want the shelf to start. And mark where I want it to go. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just marking down where I'm going to cut. I'm going to stay on the inside of the line. And again, my table saw won't cut 4 inches deep. It only cuts about 3 1/4. So I'm going to hand cut it. All right, as I go, I'm going to work from both sides of the line to make sure I'm tracking as straight as I can down each side. I'm just gently tapping it because I want to see when I start to drive it in, it's going to put a dent in the wood where it's tight, so I can see where I need to do a little more handwork to make it fit. All right. It's a nice snug fit. So now I'm going to take it off and I'm going to cut this arch round now. Alright, so I just have a flexible sanding strip here to ferre out the curve and get rid of all the bandsaw marks. Alright, so it's finally time to take care of this ugly branch that's been hanging out here this whole time. I'm just going to carve it over in a decorative manner, and I'm going to use one of these grinder attachments just to grind that off, clean it up a little bit. Let's spritz some water on it here to get an idea of what it's going to look like with some finish on it. So yeah, I think it's going to look pretty awesome. So when I was carving this line right here, this grain line, I carved it down and cut it back in just a little bit to make it look like the wood is flowing out around this, as if this is a river that's a log. And then I did the same thing on this side, so the grain flows around here. And then I just, that big chunk of rotten area, I just completely ground that out and then just sanded it over. So yeah, pretty happy with how that turned out. Not an ugly branch after all. Turned into a nice feature. Right, to mount the shelf to the wall, I'm going to use these brackets, and they will have a stem on it that sticks out that the client will drill into the hole on their side. This is going 2 states away, so they're going to install it themselves. But this bracket is about 3/16 inch thick that will stand proud of the wall. So I'm going to route a trough in here for it to conceal this bracket so it still sits flush to the wall. Alright, so that should enclose this nicely. Alright, I put this tape on here while I sanded it to protect my joinery, since the joint was all nice and tight. If I sanded away too much wood, then the joint wouldn't be tight, but that's my joinery area. So now I'm going to peel this off and glue it up. And since this joint is nice and tight already, I'm going to use an epoxy, so that way the epoxy will act as a lubricant so I can slide it together easy. And also, if I use normal wood glue that has water in it, like a PVA glue has a lot of moisture in it, it could swell the fibers of the wood and make it really difficult to get this in. The last thing I want to do is split either of these 2 pieces trying to drive it together because the glue swelled and expanded so much.